All right. Welcome to another episode of the Hot Take of the Day podcast. I'm very excited to be joined by Alan Gilmer, famous for a lot of things. Certainly the legacy of Drilling Info, which I always say Enverus. Am I saying it right?
You are saying it right.
Okay, that's what I thought, because I hear some people pronounce it wrong, and I figure that they're wrong and I'm right, but I should ask. So, Alan, welcome to the show. I hope how's quarantine going?
The quarantine is, as long as the liquor stores and the hardware stores are open, I hardly notice.
Did you see that from the CDC? No, it was that World Health Organization. After Trump said, I'm going to withdraw funding, the WHO the next day said that WHO Europe recommends that they don't allow alcohol to people because it's weakening people's immune system. I'm like, if you want to guarantee riots like we're having in Michigan, try closing the liquor stores.
Yeah, I like to see them try that in Russia.
Yeah, well, yeah, 100%. So, Alan, how are things going? Talk first about the new role, the new transition, and what you're up to these days.
Well, so I'm my title now. I'm on the board. I'm not the chairman of the board anymore, and I'm my title is founder advisor, and it's fantastic, actually. It's we have a really great team there, and I try to make myself available to discuss things that we figured out in the past. And this is a cyclical industry, and what are the things that worked and what didn't work, and how it's this one's a little different, but it's I don't know. It's it's one of those things where you give birth to a baby, and at a certain point, your baby gets married and is off doing some other things, and you just, I'm really just proud of it. There's so many people that have been along, that are running the company now that were along nearly the entire way. So I'm pretty proud of the whole thing.
Oh, I mean, how can you not be? I mean, and I get the child analogy, obviously, because we sold One Energy in pieces, and it was never the size the Drilling Info was and what you guys did, but seeing it continue on and being in a different role as an investor instead of actually like driving the ship, it's very different, especially in such a crazy environment. And Enverus was very, very active in acquisitions over the last couple of years, and really established itself as like the premier provider of all things data and knowledge. I mean, as that vision came through, how were you able to execute on that?
Well, I mean, that was the difficult part, and that was really one of the reasons that that I went out and sought Jeff Hughes to be at the time, come join as president and chief operating officer, because we were building a complicated business with lots of different moving parts, lots of different business units. And Jeff has an incredible capability of simplifying, of taking complex systems and simplifying them, identifying the important parts and simplifying them. And to me, that was magic. I mean, I was just see how things worked, how things interconnected, and then figured out how to put in the methodologies to look at the linkages, to make sure that the linkages were working, and to make sure that we weren't seeing a lot of things fall through the cracks. And it was really that capability, and it was I'd say it was organization and process controls. I mean, fantastic. And it was something that I had little experience at and no capability into it.
It is funny, and we were at the Energy Ship Summit in Scottsdale together in the end of February, which may go down as the last normal conference either you and I will have in our lives. But we talk about AI and process improvement versus technology, and it seems to me that as everyone's trying to get an edge, a lot of people talk about technology as the differentiator, but I really think it's process improvement and identifying what you need and what you can cut out, and then being efficient there. It sounds like that was sort of one of the keys that Jeff brought to the organization and to the growth that you guys have experienced.
Absolutely. I mean, it was that process improvement allowed us, today we develop faster and more things than we did when we started. It was, and there was a certain time where we were stuck. We had legacy architecture issues. The things that all software guys go through, and he busted through all of that so that we could spend our money building and not maintaining. And I think that was a key. And I agree with you 100%. I mean, everybody looks for disruption, but at the end of the day, really, how do you do things cleaner? And I'll give you a funny example. So if you read SPE if you read the SPE journal, they talk about all these, version 1 fracs, version 2 fracs, or era, third era fracs, things like that. When the business was still going before it really shut down a month ago, we looked at that and it was like, of what, if you're reading these magazines and you think this is what is leading edge, or this is what everybody's doing, it turns out that leading edge or what everybody's doing is really being done by 2% of the world, or 2% of the companies.
Right.
And so it really is like, it's like the Earth. You take a look at, we're in the space age, but we have civilizations that still exist on Earth that are in the Stone Age, and there's this juxtaposition between all these different ages. And I think it's an interesting analogy to apply to an industry.
Right. So talking about the industry, a lot has changed. I mean, we saw each other end of February. We were talking about what sort of we projected coming. Coronavirus was certainly front and center, but not like the only thing that was in the news. So a lot has changed. What do you make of where we are today as an industry, and how optimistic or pessimistic or realistic are you about the future in the next, call it 6 months, 2 years, and 5 years for the U.S. in particular? U.S. and Canada. I should always been those. I always think of U.S. and Canada as really the same energy industry, but
we are, and it is a symbiotic relationship, and we are. Those are our brothers for sure.
Yeah,
I'd say that the outlook for the United States is, in terms of a pricing point of view, is terrible for the next few months, and we start seeing some solidity in the fourth quarter, in which our folks think that it's going to mean that means solidifying around a $40. At a $40 floor. That's when OPEC really kicks in. That's when the results of what's happening now are really kick in. It's not going to happen before that. So it's between now and then. But between now and the fourth quarter, which is going to be at least a quarter, at least 3 months, probably 4 or 5 months, it's going to be continued carnage, and it's going to be how do you survive?
Yeah, and it's really interesting because you certainly see a lot of commentators come out and say, let businesses fail. Yeah, I don't know if you saw on CNBC, and I can't remember his name, but the social capital CEO that was sort of like, the stimulus package is totally wrong. It should only be given to individuals. It shouldn't bail out anybody on Wall Street, and it should buy no debt, no bonds, no shares, no anything. Just screw it. If you were invested, it's too bad for you. I have a different view on that. I'm curious your view on the stimulus package and the carnage and what's going on and survival in all the industries. What's your take on the stimulus package?
Well, I do think that the stimulus package, anytime that DC is going to be involved in anything with regards to putting the cash flow stream out back to the citizens in some way or another, it's going to be, wildly imperfect. There's just, you can't help it. And I think both public entities, private entities, and states, will use a lot of this stimulus to cover up a lot of bad decisions that they made in the past. And I think, and I think I've had a lot of discussions with, various folks. I know we was talking with Bud Brigham and various folks with regards to that meeting that they were going to have in the White House, that Harold Hamm was going to have in the White House, looking at a variety of proposals and having, and a lot of those proposals, frankly, were very self-serving. And but at the end of the day, it was like, we need to be an industry that's not looking for handouts. We need to be whenever I've gone to DC, here's what the politicians always told me. And they said, we love you oil guys because you're never asking for anything other than to be left alone.
Right.
Whereas every other industry is over there with their hand out. And I do think that at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot of money going out there to save some entities that probably shouldn't be saved, and it'll just delay getting them out and about. But that seems to be the whole thing of everything. I mean, it's really what we're talking about in terms of all of this is the financial equivalent of what is it what they call lowering the peak or extending the
flattening the curve or whatever.
Flattening the curve, That's kind of why I like hurricanes. Hurricanes are over in a day, and then you get a rebuild, and they take out all the bad structures.
How have you found the dog barking makes me laugh because there was that old college humor conference call in real life, which I don't know if you've ever seen the sketch, but there's sort of 6 comedians and they're pretending like they're on a conference call, but they're actually all in the conference room at the same time. And so, it's the same issues we were having, like getting into the meeting and can you send me the passcode? And then, the dog's barking and they're like, I'm working. And anyway, it's great. We should put a link to it. If people haven't seen it, I'll put a link to it.
Oh, that would be fantastic. I've had so much fun with Zoom conferences over the last month. I've met people's kids, their 5-year-old kids and stuff like that. My problem is that I have glass. I face the street, and I've got one dog who is completely batshit crazy. And she got ADHD, and anybody who comes by, she's got to be barking at the window.
Well, so the Zoom thing actually brings up two questions. First, will be related to your background in terms of like software, but the bar for new companies building products, like it's so funny that people get mad at oil and gas companies for not having run a business, but they use debt, but they actually had a product and a vision. Whereas Zoom, to the best of my knowledge, it really isn't even a pay service, and most people don't pay. Google, most people don't pay except for advertisers. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, we have all these free services and free content. And as a consumer, we expect it. We're almost mad if we don't have it. And yet Zoom is now this integral part of life. And I don't know how many people actually have a subscription. How did you find that building out software with consumers and the way that they thought about pricing models?
Well, I think it has to do with just the business model, right? So what does Google do? If you think about like newspapers were not about what they did for a living, right? It wasn't about going out and doing journalism. It was selling advertising. And that's exactly what Google is. Google is a big advertising, business. And so I think of those as business models that are askew to what's being delivered. There's that old saying about if you're getting something for free, you're not the customer.
Right. Well, and then we get mad when the media is which brings us to the coronavirus, is the media is actually not responsible journalists because they're at the core selling ads. And so we get mad, and I certainly get mad when the underlying bias shows up on whatever station you're watching or whoever's making the model. But at the core, it's because we're not paying for the content that we're consuming.
That's exactly right. That's actually one of the reasons I support. There's this little experiment here in Texas, the Texas Tribune, that Evan Smith, who was the editor of Texas Monthly, started up, and he and it's they are paid by donors to go develop news. And I think I looked at it as just an experiment. It's an interesting experiment. And, the issues, look at what's happening with China. Bloomberg's having to deal with this big issue right now because, they were doing a lot of very first-rate journalism in China that China said, if you actually are going to publish this, you are not going to be welcome in China anymore. And they made the decision to not publish, right? So
Yeah.
it is, these are the sticky wickets that everybody's having to deal with.
Well, and it makes it even more complicated when you add the element of social media. And I wonder if SARS had existed now, where the mortality rate truly was 10%. So I think what I read was there were 8,000 worldwide cases and 800 died. And I think that, by any stretch of the imagination, the initial fatality rates of this were super overblown. The narrative has been so driven towards self-interest of whatever that interest is. I wonder if social media had existed when SARS existed, if there would have been the same freak out as we're having now.
That's really fascinating because, certainly social media allows you to virally expand a message. And, and I will tell you, I just on my Facebook, I have Facebook friends from all over, they're every style of outlook and political point of view, which makes for fun Facebook actually. But, the emotion, I posted, I posted something saying, is there, at the risk of inciting crazy emotion, is there better alternatives than, global house arrest and destruction of the economies to deal with these kind of issues? And the emotions that come from people, that people were defending it it was always an emotional issue. It was always, you're trying to kill me,
Right.
And it was pretty fascinating.
Well, and it's actually interesting. We had a Zoom call last night with my parents and my sister and her boyfriend, and so we sort of do this once a week, and we did a games night, which is interesting that we had never thought to do that like ever before, and so somehow that became a thing, and it's been fun. But my mother and I talk a lot, and I've featured her, fortunately or unfortunately, on social media because some people called me out, being like, are you willing to trade your mother? And I'm like, yeah, I would trade my mother for my kids. I would trade the old generation for the young generation's future every single time, especially when it's 99 out of 100 that are going to benefit at the cost of one who, in the true definition of flattening the curve, if you were going to get sick, you were going to get sick anyway. And then the new data that I'm seeing is if you require a ventilator, the thing that we were trying to preserve, is with this virus, if you require a ventilator, there is an 80% fatality, which again, it's like like if you were fishing a well, and I know that, this is emotion versus logic, but if you're fishing a well and you have to spend $1 million for a 20% chance to save the well versus re-drill the well for 2.5, you do the math and you say 80% of the time I'm going to spend the $1 million, lose the well, and then go drill the other well anyway. So the risk reward is to cut your losses and re-drill the well today. And nobody wants to have that conversation, but I was having it with my mother last night. And, I get it as a personal person. Like, she is afraid. She's 74. She doesn't want to leave the house. And 74? Oh, I'm going to get in trouble for that. She's only 72. But she is nervous about her health, and her friends are nervous about their health, and they are having Zoom dinners because they don't know, and there isn't testing for them. And then you and me and my kids, like, we're under 50. The fatality rate's like 1 in 10,000, 1 in 1,000, maybe, if you get it. And I'm like, we gotta go. So it is interesting, your emotional versus.
I do think that it's, because I have high blood pressure, which I found out a month ago, and got on, and right as this thing was taking off was, you remember when we were in Scottsdale, I said, I had a problem with my vision. Well, it was high blood pressure, and so I went on blood pressure medication, which is now a comorbidity factor. ACE inhibitors, that's a real deal. And I do understand how people are going to come at that. They're sitting there saying, "Oh, shoot, I've got a risk. I've now got a much higher risk of dying." And what's that going to mean? It means you're going to take personal responsibility to not be around other people. You're going to stay home. You're going to deal with delivery. You're going to deal with everybody from a distance. That doesn't mean that everybody else needs to do that. It means that you need to go do that. You're quarantining yourself, right? Yeah. And that's the whole goal. And I think looking at that is, it's interesting what's going to happen. Sweden is an interesting example. Mm-hmm. In areas of the United States, certain cities in the United States that are examples. Mexico is an example right now. We need to be seeing it because this whole thing was pushed was predicated on the concept that we didn't have enough hospitals. Right. We didn't have enough medical system to be able to handle the kind of infections that we're looking at. And is that the case? And I don't know where you get good data on.
Well, it's actually one of the interesting things because obviously, as we talk about the state of the industry, and I was on the Flipping the Barrel podcast earlier last week and talking about some of the challenges our industry faces and what would I recommend to young kids in their careers and et cetera. But the core skill oil and gas people have is that we get so much data. And that was the power of Drilling Info and of RSEG, who you guys acquired. And you had all this data, that hundreds of thousands of wells with hundreds of thousands of streams of data, and you were spending $60,000 a day drilling or $40,000 a stage, and you had to make instantaneous decisions based on the best data you had in that second, and that you might be wrong, and as soon as there's new data, you make a new decision. And so what's been interesting to me from the outside is, March 7th when Saudi did what they did and March 6th when Russia did what they did, I wrote a blog that was basically like, storage is a problem. We're going to have to shut in. Demand is down 20 million barrels a day. This is a travesty. And it has taken the industry 40 days to go to the RRC and have self-interested pitch books, and no one's really talking about the core issue. But at least we reacted over 40 days where the industry's generally seeing the issue, and it's not life or death. But politicians haven't looked at the data, aren't re-looking at models, aren't revisiting the fact that it was supposed to be hospital beds, and now it feels like it's don't let anyone get sick until there's a vaccine. And then they're not reopening the economy just a little. Restaurants are dying, airlines are dying. And they will not. So when people say, well, what would you do if oil and gas dies? How would you change? Well, we're the best decision makers in high stress, high risk, high cost situations. And in other businesses, we can apply that. So I'm curious your feedback on that.
I agree with you. I think we have a remarkable record at making those good decisions too. I mean, if you look at life lost or huge damage impaired relative to the processes of dangerous stuff, it's minuscule. And but I think it's when we deal with human life, we all become we all end up becoming removed from data because we become too empathetic.
Right.
A great book called Against Empathy by a guy named Paul Bloom that talks a lot about that. Is here are how do we make good decisions? Well, we make good decisions based off of numbers and data that come through there. And we make bad decisions based off of personal stories that are not emblematic of the real problem.
Right.
That and journalism is masterful at turning the data or blowing data out of the water, not having us pay any attention to the data, by turning into a very personal story. Because, it starts off with Maria is coming across the border.
Right.
It's been, and they started very, very personal, and you feel for that. It really, empathy, it really grabs at your heart. You really understand where she's coming from. And so therefore you're going to make crappy decisions based off of just trying to help her.
Right.
of a sudden the whole issue is not about that. It's about these other issues. And I think that's the biggest failure that we have in our society right now is that we're so in love with how we feel rather than solving real problems that we can't recognize that. And we're going to hold on to our empathy at the cost of our rationality to whatever extent that we can.
And actually, you made me remember. I remember about 3-4 weeks ago. I think maybe it was a little longer. I mean, every day feels like Groundhog Day, to be honest. So it's hard to differentiate the days. But it was right after that. Those kids in Florida were spring breaking, and they were all like, "We're not going to get sick." And the media was actively pushing a narrative around like the one person in America who was like 27 and had no pre-existing, and like they died, and so you better be aware. And it's and to me, I'm still going like 1 in 70 million. Like, I mean, my chances of winning of like that's about the lottery. But you're right, we push a very emotional narrative, and especially in social media where, you know, it's late at night, people are drinking. On Twitter, you have 280 characters. You just want to be heard. And so then I wonder is our society shut down and people are okay with this? And we'll talk about a couple of things around that. But like, because we all have social media, we're so used to living in a world that's on our phone with people that we don't know, that like being trapped in our house doesn't feel as antisocial as it would have 20 years ago, and therefore it's like prolonged our ability to stay home. I'm curious your thoughts.
I would tell you, it's things like Postmates and Uber Eats and things like that are really saving our bacon right now. And if you think about it, what a recent construct those are, you know. Cleaned out grocery stores, lines of grocery stores. You can't get there. You don't know what you'll be able to get in there. You know, it's once the supply chains start breaking down, that's when things start getting real. And we are not living we're not seeing the reality yet.
No. And Amazon
and the supply chains are breaking down and they're starting to show up little by little.
Well, and Amazon is trading at an all-time high, which a friend had pointed out 2 days ago. And I looked at their stock in the last 5 days is up like almost 18%. And I continue to tell people, like, I'm very bearish right now on the world economy, and I'm very, very worried about the future. But people are like, well, look at Amazon. Like, but Amazon is killing small business because, so then is there a reaction when you can go out? Like, the first thing I'm going to do when I get to go out is I'm going to go to a mall. I'm going to go to the busiest restaurant I can find. I'm going to go to like a nightclub, and like, it's going to be crazy. And so is there like a counterculture movement like in the 60s and 70s against Vietnam, against the government, that like we push back on Amazon? Because Amazon is just selling consumer goods. Well, there's no competition. It just seems crazy to me.
Well, you know, I've had a problem kind of with the alternative, you know, for a long time. Amazon's been around, what, 20 years, 18 years?
Yeah.
And never really has made a profit, or, you know, it's made some profits on certain things that it invested later on. But it did do so at the expense of lots of businesses that thought that they needed to make a profit on selling a good.
Right.
And, you know, and the idea being, and we see this in it really is, it's herd mentality of the investor. It is, if we can create enough value and I think this is a lot of what the modern economy has become is let's create, as an example, let's create a magic unicorn in which we're going to appeal to the emotions of everybody, and we're going to get them to support it from a market cap point of view that's completely irrational from a price to earning or anything else, and it is going to be not subject to the world of supply and demand at all. It's going to be supported by its religious fervent supporters. And as long as they're going to continue to throw money at it, then and create and maintain market cap, then we're all, then it's going to be able to go out there and take on all comers, because it's no longer kind of bound by the economic laws.
It's actually funny. Just as you said the company name, for whatever reason, the Zoom skipped, so I didn't hear it. And before you say what it was, the amazing thing was you could have been talking about any one of 40 companies.
Yeah.
And that is almost the scariest part, is that like everyone was so mad at oil and gas and the business model, and you're not free cash flow positive. And at the same time, WeWork was going to get a $47 billion valuation. Tesla, who, when you said religious fervor, as I assume, that was the only cue that took it away from Apple or any of these guys. But like Apple is a religious following. Tesla is a religious following. It's just oil and gas. There's no Exxon that like people are like, oh, I gotta own Exxon.
Right. And the difference is marketing. And the difference is marketing to the amygdala. And oil and gas has always been completely rotten at marketing to anything.
Oh yeah, I mean, and you listen to some of these CEOs. I mean, God loves Scott Sheffield, but him at the RRC hearing, I don't know if you listened, but like, I mean, that was one of the more painful presentations I've heard. Although I am going to use that, I'm going to say no. I just need 2 more minutes, and then I'm going to go for like 25. I just 2 more minutes. That's
2 more minutes.
2 more minutes.
But and frankly, it is the problem is that the people that run the oil companies generally are very smart engineers, and they like to talk about things that they can quantify.
Right.
And they are not marketers at all. They don't know. They don't understand marketing at all. And you look at a guy like Jobs at Apple. That guy was a complete marketer.
Total marketer.
How to market, and so much of what goes on in Silicon Valley is about how to market. And you really do have a relatively small number of mandarins that control the investments of some, we amalgamate our investments today into, mutual funds and into these massive retirement funds and things like that. Very few gatekeepers, relatively, and they get to dictate who are going to be the magic swans.
Yeah. So when we think about the future outside oil and gas, and I want to go back to our Zoom conversation, do you think that we're going to see a trend of more work from home? Like, do you feel like the society is actually working effectively right now from home, or does it feel like a weird vacation? Do you really think that we see a big move to the work at home that millennials have wanted for their entire career at this point?
I think that the long-term ramification of this is going to be a lot more work from home, especially if the productivity is maintained during the time frame. And a lot of those ways are pretty measurable. I think like at Enverus, we have a very, I'd say, generous work from home. Be in the office when you need to be, work from home when you need to be, and take care of your kids when you need to take care of your kids. Those kind of things. But this was the first one in which, we're just kind of completely away from the offices, and we had to get our IT infrastructure set up, to go do that, as did a lot of people. And I think, I think that this is going to be a rubber band that does not completely snap back to where it was.
And when you think about the implications, and so I always try and make like, a data-driven decision. And when I look at the future, I am deeply worried about the world economy and the lack of recovery. And even so far as if all of a sudden commercial real estate, because again, in a recession or a normal world, which is why I am in favor of the government bailout, because in fact, they did it by shutting everyone down with no option. And a recession like the 2008, 2009 what did we call it? The Great Recession. That happened over time. This was a 36% correction in the stock market as a proxy instantaneously. This was every citizen locked in their house. And so commercial real estate has no chance to respond. But the spin-off of this is commercial real estate who has huge debt as the basis of their entire business plan. If half of the people, 20% of the people don't go back, like you look at Calgary has 30% vacancy downtown, and downtown is dead.
Right.
So now all of a sudden people start staying at home. You have all these buildings that are empty. You have all these businesses downtown that don't work anymore. You have all these airlines that now don't need to fly because people are doing this and it's normal. We don't want to shake hands. The businesses are just not built for it. And the destruction of capital that will occur to adjust for that. I mean, I can see a scenario where the S&P is 1,500 or 1,000 before this is all done.
No, I agree with you. I think that especially in office, kind of office real estate, office buildings and real estate, I would not want to be a landlord of an office building. I think that the long-term aspect of that is really negative. And, and I'll tell you an example. Here in Austin, the city council unilaterally went out, as the Austin City Council will often do, and they made a sweeping deal saying that if you didn't have to, if you were either commercially or individually residential, you could forego paying your rent for April and May, and your landlord couldn't foreclose on it. And so that was again an empathetic response to the whole thing.
Right.
The problem with all of that is that come June,
absolutely,
these companies and individuals that couldn't afford to pay rent for April and May now have tripled rent due at that moment, and they're not there. There is no way they're going to be able to make that. So what they're doing is, what would have been a smarter response? Well, a smart response might have been encouraging landlords to go get the banks and landlords together to refinance into this historically low price point, and then to be able to go offer all their folks the ability to forego a couple of months of rent and build out incremental increases in rent afterwards. Things like, things that you could do just if you weren't so set upon being anti-corporation.
Right. And politicians, they don't like to, so yeah, I agree with you. June 1st, those people are getting evicted, and that's going to show up on their credit report. And so their quality of living, they're going to have to move down market into somewhere that will accept them, and security deposits will double. And all the people who missed their rent will forego their security deposit in the first place, which is why April is I'm not that worried about April, because the landlords have that money and they just won't give it back. It's the next month, which is, I think, why you're starting to see riots, right? You're seeing the Michigan, although the whole, it's illegal to form in more than two. But I think that as this is sinking in, I think people are starting to be I am really done. You've changed the rules of America and the game that I was playing. And you did it unilaterally in 30 days with no change and no warning. And I can't win in that system. So I reject the premise of playing. And that is when social unrest and riots. And I mean, you probably lived through the 60s and 70s when, police were shooting students and tear gas and protests and burning bras and civil discord.
Well, the problem is that there's certain cohorts around, political cohorts right now that are looking for that. They want this. They're looking for a spark, and we're providing it to them, and it's just pathetic.
Well, one of my predictions, and I sort of make a tongue-in-cheek comment because I don't actually think I'm going to be able to be a successful politician. And I know this because in social media, when people troll me, I usually troll back and tell them to fuck off. And I don't. Well,
you and Trump.
I don't know. Yeah, and but he's richer than me apparently. But as I think about that, I just feel like politicians, no one came out and said, "Okay, America, here's the deal. We have $2.3 trillion of stimulus," and I know this because I was terrified and I wanted to liquidate my entire mutual bond, all my bonds at second to last week of March, because I was like, "Holy cow, this whole thing could collapse." And so I talked to my financial planner and I'm like, sell it all. And they're like, there's actually no bid for bonds for the first time ever. And these guys are trading bonds in 1987 and 2008. And they said that it is worse. Like the financial system came closer to collapsing at that last week of March now than ever before in the history of the world. But yeah, and so then you think about that, and you think about all these politicians who say, okay, we need stimulus, and that's the reason we had to buy bonds with the Fed, because if we didn't, the world ends. Yeah. But the only way we can pay for that is we have to raise the Social Security age now to 75. We're going to cut all Social Security benefits, all state pensions to all teachers and everyone who has it. Those are going to be cut in half. All of the underfunded pension liabilities of all those companies that have been paying pensions, those also are going to go in half. And Medicare, we're going to have to cut that in half because that's $1 trillion. That's how we're going to try and balance this budget. And if you had said that, America would have freaked out about the loss of entitlements. But instead, we just went, no, we're just going to print money and we'll deal with it later. Mm-hmm. The later is going to be so bad. I don't even know how the world recovers, to be honest.
It's the numbers are so massive, and it's so hard to figure it out. And there is no such thing as a safe harbor.
So you look at the models, and one of the things I loved from your presentation at the Energy Ship Summit was to talk about some of the changes in the electric grid and the changes in power and the changes sort of climate change, which has obviously taken a backseat to this. But curious as you look at data in the world and COVID and electricity and power consumption, and what do you see in the next 10 years?
We're definitely seeing power, not just transportation energy, but we're seeing powering of buildings going. I mean, right now we have it's a very real effect. You're seeing electricity demand drop across the board. Because all these big buildings right now are going on maintenance. They're not having to go air condition or heat their buildings or what have you. It's gonna get worse as we go into the summertime. So it's it's been interesting. I mean, we have a business that actually about 70% of the utilities use to go figure out, and it uses machine learning and artificial intelligence to figure out what is the demand and what is the supply of various different energies. And the reason that that's important is because with regards to wind and solar, there's such an overt subsidy of that you get money for it, right? It's not like a soft subsidy in which you get a tax break or this, that, or the other. You get actual cash.
If you're the utility.
Yeah. Which allows for electricity to sell at negative prices. And it doesn't sell at real negative prices because these guys are getting paid, a nickel a kilowatt hour over here on this side. So they can sell it to down to -4 cents a kilowatt hour and still make money.
Right.
So you're not defying the I'd say kind of economic physics altogether.
How does that reconcile with people who say the levelized cost of energy for wind and solar is lower than natural gas, as an example? Because if what you're saying is true, and that people are actually being physically paid cash, that feels maybe it's cheaper to make, but the fundamental economics are still being supported by hard cash payments.
The reason is because electricity is valuable or not valuable while it fluctuates over a 24-hour period, and so if you're going to build a windmill, you might be able to sit there and say that the electricity that comes out of the windmill when when the wind is blowing is lower than is lower than natural gas across the board, but wind doesn't blow all the time, and that means you have to store it and you're actually having to supplement all of that all the time. And so that's where the lie comes in. That's when they start saying, well, the reality is that there is no grid without natural gas or coal. I mean, there is no grid. There is no grid that's completely wind powered. There's no grid that's completely solar powered, or even, kind of battery powered at this point, because there's just not enough battery power on the planet to supply more than a couple of minutes worth of electricity. So these are kind of, I'd say these are statements made by people that are trying to push an agenda, that are looking to maintain their deal. The problem is that it creates a negative price environment. The overt subsidy creates a negative price environment, so that natural gas and anything else, coal or natural gas, is completely out of the market during those time frames in which the price is negative, right? Nobody in their right mind would pay somebody to go take their electricity when they can just kind of take it offline completely and pay zero. So that is that's a real problem right over there, because no one is building any more gas plants. They're building a lot more. The problem is right now we're pretty much saturated with wind electricity at the time that wind is blowing.
Yeah, right. So it surges to more than you need in the places that it is.
Absolutely, and so so adding that additional windmill doesn't solve any problem. Adding that additional solar plant adds no problem once you've reached the maximum amount of electricity that's going to come in there. So we basically have played around with looking at this supply-demand differential, because it's very important for the utilities to not have blackouts and brownouts, right? That creates a lot of animosity amongst its clients. So they need to know when is going to be the gap. And they pay whatever it costs in order to cycle up a gas plant. And the faster they have to cycle up a gas plant to meet that demand, supply-demand differential, the more CO2 it puts out there. So it's to the point where there was in Colorado a few years ago, we were looking at this at the time frames that they were taking. They were actually putting out more CO2 than if they were just doing natural gas altogether, in terms of balancing out all this stuff. And that's not exactly the case now, because they have these fast cycle plants. But the issue is what was fascinating was all the patterns went to hell in the last month, and our guys had to figure out how to forecast all these things without patterns, without pattern recognition in the past and what have you. And we were able to go get that done in transition to a completely different way of doing these predictions than we had in the past. But so many of these things were based off of these. We have a lot of systems that are based off of how do things operate in a normal environment, and not on how things are taking place right now. And this is real number science. It's
right. I knew wearing my shirt that says "Talk Nerdy to Me," I knew it was going to be appropriate for today. Well, and it is funny, because it was one thing I hadn't really thought about, but like the whole, one of the things, and from my speech down at Energy Ship, one of the things I talked about was that, like, there's no such thing as an altruistic motive. And so the climate change motion about CO2 and anti-fossil fuels was the same as the natural gas that Aubrey McClendon pushed in 2006 to displace coal. And the reason was to create a market for natural gas. And the result was natural gas went way up in price. And then we drilled the shit out of it, which made it go way down in price. And so I've always had this view that like the wind and solar, like they were trying to create a world that would spend trillions of dollars changing out the infrastructure in a growing demand world. But to your point, if people are staying home where their houses, don't consume that much electricity, and we're not going to offices, we're not cooling offices, we're not transporting ourselves as much, electric vehicles aren't required as much because we're not traveling. oil is required less because we're not traveling. When you think about that, you might end up in a period where for 8 or 10 years until population growth catches up, and in a recession, you're going to, like, your demand could fall off the floor, which will actually hurt wind and solar because there'll be no need for new projects. You'll just be able to take coal offline as those plants get retired and not need any more power.
Well, it's I do think that there is a certain possibility, even likelihood of that happening. I don't see, when things change, when you're really changing things out quickly, it is, not everything behaves elastically. I think we're going to see a lot of plastic deformation, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, and then the last thing that seems to me is Trump ran in 2016 on a Make America Great, bring manufacturing back. And it really, I would say it really didn't happen. And logically, when he would say before, well, we're putting tariffs on and China's paying. And everyone who is an economist is like, well, actually, the American consumer's paying. What are you talking about? But with those tariffs, groundwork laid, and now this news coming out of Fox that may or may not be that it was bad lab protocols that had this virus leak out in Wuhan. And not that I want to push a conspiracy theory, but I think you could see such nationalism coming around this that we actually, there's a catalyst to make it in America. And that
absolutely. And I think the real catalyst is coming from the pharmaceuticals that we cannot get from China and the medical devices that we have problems getting from China today. I mean, I think at least on the whole medical side, we're having to look at our supply chains and saying, do we really want to be dependent on this country? And from an energy point of view, as you very well know, wind and solar is completely dependent on China to build the
raw material,
the short-lived machines that provide, the non-renewable machines that supply renewable energy.
Well, to me, the one thing that could be good coming out of this is for a city like Calgary and for a city like Midland. They have an incredibly talented workforce, and they have a lot of manufacturing capability because of what they've done for oil fields. And to use those warehouses and manufacturing and that labor force to bring American and Canadian manufacturing back into those cities and use existing infrastructure. So my optimism for the future, although it's very, very, very bad for the world. Now, we're going to stop using Chinese electricity, which is 74% coal-fired. So that'll be good for the environment. But we will bring all of that labor back to the U.S. to fill jobs that we've lost because of the reaction to the coronavirus. Goods will cost more, and we'll shut our borders for tariffs, which will make the rest of the world poorer and lead to more geopolitical instability, more regional conflict, more wars, more genocide, more death, more fighting for resources. But for the US and arguably for Canada, it'll be good, but that's never good.
There was a book written about a decade ago, or maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, by he was the guy from Austin, and he Friedman. I think it wasn't. It was Friedman.
Thomas Friedman. Was it the From Beirut to Jerusalem book? That guy?
No, it wasn't Thomas Friedman. It wasn't the New York Times. Friedman. It was the economist that worked for the it's an intelligence business here in Austin, and I can't remember the name, but he wrote 2 books. One of which, and that was all about this, about how well situated we are. And it's interesting to me, it's just to your point, they're building 2 steel plants, one in Sinton and the other one closer to Corpus Christi, Portland or something like that, because all the natural gas is coming into there, and long-term, low-cost natural gas coming into a port in which you have access to the intercoastal waterways, which are the lowest cost ways of transporting any kind of good. then all of a sudden it doesn't matter. It used to be you put your steel plants next to where you had iron ore, where you had access to iron ore.
Yeah.
But today, so much of steel comes from reused steel or junk steel or what have you. You can get it anywhere. You really want it to be where you can fabricate it cheaply and be able to move it cheaply. And I think it's interesting to watch how the Texas Gulf Coast, specifically around Corpus Christi, is becoming that place.
Well, it does provide for some optimism on the S&P short-term pain, and just really for businesses that exist today, it's going to be extraordinarily painful. In 5 years, the renaissance that may come out of some of these trends of onshoring a lot of the things that we had historically offshored, and the deglobalization movement, I think is a real thing. Well, Alan, I mean, I always love chatting with you, and your insights, and you're a very colorful character, and also very, very smart. And I congratulate you beyond, what you accomplished with Drilling Info, and that company that you founded and set off into the world is really, really something to be proud of. And it's very impressive.
Well, I appreciate that greatly. And I really keep up Hot Takes of the Day. It is unlike anything I've ever seen before. And, I listen to it religiously. You do a great job.
Well, I really appreciate it. So thanks for coming on. For everyone who wants to catch up on those episodes Alan's talking about, you can visit our website at www.hottakeoftheday.com. Old podcasts, old blogs. Unlike politicians, I keep what I blog out on the website, so you can always judge me for my performance. Clearly, my CDEV share's not a great one, but I won't be paying taxes for quite some time. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, be safe, be good. Have a great day, and bye for now.
Thanks, David. Thanks a lot, man. That was awesome.
It really was. Thank you, Alan. We'll get it all cleaned up, and we get it up online. I think that this has been my favorite episode to record. I love chatting with you, so I'm going to have you back on frequently.
You're a thinker, man. You see things that a lot of people refuse to see.
Well, I sure appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.
See ya.
Bye.